if those responsibilities and duties kind of are the same along all your offices. So that'll be 5 minutes for each participant. And then later on, we're going to go into 30 minutes of different questions that we have submitted from different individuals. And so once we go through that, then at the very end, at the 10 minutes, when we do the wrap up, we'll discuss what the strengths of a DA is in your opinion. So first, I'd like to introduce Tom Ostly, who is the Deputy Attorney General at the California Department of Justice and a former SF Assistant DA. Tom, if you want to start us off.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you to Butch, Nicole, and Dana, and Jessie for being here as well, and to Marie and everyone else who put this together. So a little bit about myself. I went to law school at Berkeley. When I was there, I worked at the East Bay Community Law Center and then continued the work I was doing there as an attorney in private practice. I worked doing essentially government benefits, helping people with HIV disease get the benefits that they're entitled to, both income support, medical benefits, unemployment. I also did eviction defense. So after several years of doing that, I also worked at Bay Area Legal Aid. And then I took a break from practicing law and then came back and wanted to practice criminal. So I actually had applied to the public defender's office multiple times, didn't get into the public defender. And then it was actually Nicole, who's on the panel, helped me get an interview and get hired at the San Francisco DA's office. And then when I was there, I was also teaching at the police academy and the SF Police Academy. I taught for the Sheriff's Academy. And then I was eventually went from general felonies into the crime strategies unit, which basically embeds DAs in stations. So I was in the Tenderloin and Southern Station. I was also on the state organized retail crime task force. And so I did some indictments and a couple of operations through that task force. And I also did other citywide programs like the graffiti abatement. I indicted a bunch of taggers, saved about $10 million in damage for the city. And so now I currently work at the the California Department of Justice and the Health Quality Enforcement. So most of my cases are going after doctors that overprescribe opioids or other controlled medications.
Thanks so much, Tom. I just want to say that not that anyone here is less or more interesting than the other, but Tom has been just an amazing person in general, just in this city. I've had multiple conversations with him in the past. Just Tom, thank you so much for everything. Truly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Next is Butch Ford, who is the Deputy District Attorney for Alameda County. Butch, if you want to introduce yourself.
No problem. My name is Butch Ford. My given name, which I call my government name, is Milcar Ford. I grew up in South Central LA. I'm one of 10. I'm the second oldest. My parents are clear blue collar people and did the best they could to raise us in the right way. Growing up in South Central, obviously, I saw both sides of what was going on in those areas. I grew up in a time where NWA, if anybody's familiar with that, was sort of the most popular rap group around. And I was a kid who was running around singing those rap lyrics. I went to Berkeley for undergrad. I went to Loyola Law School for law school, obviously. And then I got lucky enough to apply and get an internship with the Alameda County DA's office. I've been at the Alameda County DA's office for 22 years. For 15 out of the 22 years, I was on felony trial staff. So as a felony trial lawyer, ultimately, all I ended up doing was homicides for the last 5 years of being on felony trial staff. Currently, I am the head of our North County felony trial staff at the Renee C. Davidson Courthouse. So roughly 95% of all felony cases come across my desk. It is my job to determine what the disposition of those cases are. I negotiate all of those cases with the defense attorneys and sometimes involve the judges, everything from quality of life crimes for repeat offenders, such as theft crimes that are repeated, all the way up to homicides. So I've been doing that now for the past year, which means I am no longer trying cases as the trial lawyer, but my job is to assign cases for trial to a trial team that is composed of 12 deputy DAs. So I've enjoyed my job. I love doing it. I love doing what is right. And I think most of us will have an opportunity to say what we think a DA's job is to do. And I think simply put is it's our job to do what's right. But I'm happy to be here. I appreciate all the other panelists, and I'm actually standing in for somebody who has very strong connections to San Francisco, Nancy Tung, who was the SFDA and is now an Alameda County DA. She's a really good friend of mine, and she called me and said that she had a conflict and would I be willing to stand in, and I said I will do my best to represent for her and for DAs who do the job for the right reasons. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Butch. Next, we have Dana. Dana, forgive me if I butcher this, Dana Filkowski, Contra Costa, great, awesome, Contra Costa District Attorney and co-chair of the Human Trafficking Task Force.
I'm a deputy district attorney. Our elected district attorney is Dinah Beckton, but I have been with Contra Costa DA's office. I just had my 25th anniversary with Contra Costa DA last month. But my roots to San Francisco are really strong. I'm a graduate of the University of San Francisco. I lived at 37th and Balboa while I was in law school. I got my start as a prosecutor with an internship at the San Francisco DA's office. The first time I got to stand up in front of a judge and say my name for the record, and we get to say Dana Filkowski for the people. That was it. I was hooked. I remember calling my dad after court saying, I know what I want to do now. The idea that your job always is to do what's right, like what Butch said, really had me hooked. I clerked for a time at the Alameda DA's office. Butch, if you knew Ken Burr, he was one of my mentors, amazing homicide prosecutor who at the time explained to me how important it was to listen as part of doing justice. He gave me for my law school graduation a statue of Lady Justice, which is on my desk as we speak. It's missing one of its scales. It's pretty bent up and beat because it travels with me from assignment to assignment. But it reminds me what he had inscribed on there, which is justice, it's our job. That's really been what I've carried through. For my career, I have rotated through pretty much every assignment at the DA's office. We're a rotation-based assignment so that we have very well-rounded prosecutors. So I went through a misdemeanor tour. I started prosecuting felonies. My first vertical assignment was major narcotics and gangs. I left to have twins and then came back. My boys are now 18 and graduating from high school this year. I had to go back full time as a brand new mom, which was fun. And an interesting way of trying to balance life versus being a prosecutor and assignments that really can be all consuming. I've spent a large part of my job doing victim-based prosecution, sexual assault. I supervised the domestic violence unit, and then really got into how we can expand our impact as prosecutors by collaborating with community-based organizations. For the last 6 years, I have been on the board of directors for our nonprofit Family Justice Center. I'm currently acting chair and expect to be elected chair at our next meeting next month. I am a founding member of Contra Costa's strangulation task force that brings together healthcare partners and law enforcement and community-based organizations to try to better understand and prevent lethality from strangulation and all forms of interpersonal violence. I'm currently, I founded our human trafficking prosecution unit. I co-chair the human trafficking task force, which is based on a federal grant. And I'm a little tired right now because I'm in the middle of a huge sex trafficking case. And we finished evidence today and we argue in the morning. It's a preliminary hearing, but it was very complicated with a lot of, I think I have 30,000 pages of exhibits in evidence right now. But I'm really excited to be here because literally San Francisco is where I got my start.
Well, Dana, thanks so much for being here despite the craziness in court that you have to deal with at the moment. Next, I think we have here Jessie Leanne McGrath, the LA County Deputy District Attorney.
Hi, everybody. I guess I'm the old hand in all of this because I've been a prosecutor for 34 years. I started with the LA County DA's office in 1988, and I have been with them my entire career. And I have worked for 5 separate district attorneys over the course of that time. I've seen administrations come, I've seen them go, I've seen changes in policies, I've seen what works, what doesn't work, and I've had a fantastic career. When I first applied, I applied to both the public defender and the district attorney's office, and I was offered jobs by both. And when it came time for me to make my ultimate decision, I wanted to know where I thought I could have the most impact. And I decided that it's as a prosecutor, because as a prosecutor, you have a lot of that power. You have the decision-making ability. You have the ability to decide how things are going to go. And I really wanted to be in a situation and in an occupation where I could do justice for both victims and also for people who are criminals, because it's not a black and white thing. Most of the time, we operate in such an incredible gray area where there are pros and cons on every side that you have to look at, you have to analyze, you have to make decisions. And it's really, when you're experienced, you get to understand the nuances that are involved in criminal prosecutions. In the course of my career, I think I did misdemeanors for 8 weeks. And then they moved me into felonies because it was the late 80s, early 90s, in which case, you know, crime was out of control in Los Angeles. You know, we had 2,500 murders a year, and it just was absolutely a war zone. And so I kind of cut my teeth in a lot of that. I spent the first 8 years doing felony trials, murders, rapes, robberies, arson. I was assigned to the major narcotics unit. And then from there, I went to consumer protection. And so I spent a lot of time doing civil work, helping people who were victims of businesses. And I also was asked by Nancy Tung to participate. And I met Nancy when she was a deputy DA in San Francisco because I worked with her. I was on part of the team that sued Uber over their false advertising in relationship to their background investigations and not following the law in relationship to going to airports and things like that. So I was part of the LA County, San Francisco DA team that took on Uber. And so I was up in San Francisco a lot. And I saw the changes that took place over the 5 years that I was working on that case, because I would go up there for meetings with the DA, appear in court up there. And so I have a little bit of familiarity, not a whole lot with San Francisco, but that is how I kind of came into being asked to participate in this. And I look forward to talking about what the role of a prosecutor is, what it is that we do. And it was kind of nice. I'm glad Nancy asked me to do this because I was actually on the Uber case, and I'm a transgender woman, and I transitioned in the middle of that case. So it was, Nancy was like, great. She bought me a Sephora gift card. You know, prosecutors are not horrible people. We're actually like really nice folks who try to look out for each other. And so I'm just glad that I can offer whatever I can to help everybody out.
Well, I just have to let you know, Jessie, that Nancy just entered. So she's, I think, got 2 meetings going on, but she just popped in for a second. So I think she got to hear your comments. So that's really nice.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jessie. Nicole Crosby is the Chief Deputy City Attorney at the San Diego City Attorney's Office.
Hello, everybody. I am a chief deputy at the San Diego City Attorney's Office, and it's a very unique situation because we prosecute misdemeanor cases. But before I came to San Diego 7 years ago, almost 8, I grew up in San Francisco. My whole family is still there. My brother is a police officer there. So let me tell you, I definitely hear all the things that are still going on. I was a prosecutor in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office for almost 6 years, and I focused my time on victims of crime, specifically domestic violence, women and men who had limited English proficiency, because it is very hard to navigate the system. And throughout my career, I do think that focusing on the victims and the people who have been impacted has been the most impactful to me and like the biggest purpose, right? So it's not just justice, but it's helping people go through the system that is not built for people to go through. You know, it takes attorneys time to understand it. And then to help people who are just trying to get on with their lives, you know, navigate, get help and overcome trauma is a really hard thing to do. So being that backstop for people is a big deal. So coming to San Diego, I was a chief of our domestic violence and sex crimes unit for a number of years before I like to start trouble, right? So I wanted to start doing things because this is the exact purpose of our topic today. What can district attorneys do to make people's lives better? So I started a unit called Government Affairs and Accountability. So not only do I do public ethics and integrity regarding, you know, police officers in a positive way. Sometimes it's training issues. Sometimes there are victims who are not interviewed properly, and you need to make sure that everything is documented. I started our gun violence restraining order program, and that is a statewide model for red flag law for people who fall into this gray area. You may not be a criminal, but you're not being admitted to the county mental health hospital for your suicidal ideations because maybe they think it's substance abuse. Maybe there's no space and you have access to firearms. That is a dangerous situation. But what I've also done recently, which I think would be pretty helpful in San Francisco, and I want to hopefully during this conversation talk about how it's not taboo, is conservatorships. I never thought in my wildest dreams I would end up in probate court. You know, and this is just something that I was working with our fire department and our police department. And people in the emergency rooms, like nurses and doctors, are like, these people are here every day. Like, we don't know what to do. We are at our wits' end. And, you know, don't mind the cat. We did, you know, I did my homework. I filed petitions. And there are people whose lives are better. These are people who now can have cogent conversations. They may never be able to function at the level that we can, but this means I don't say think outside the box. In my unit, we don't have a box. We have to think about what we're going to be able to do to make it better. And being in a district attorney's office, you have the capacity to do that. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of our conversation because I could go on and on about it, but go San Francisco.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I wish I could introduce the special guest. That was your cat that came across your screen just now.
Don't mind Zephyr, him like a cameo probably.
Zephyr, there we go. Well, I think we'll get right into it. So the first thing that I'd like to ask of everyone here is basically what you, and I think this was briefly covered in the introduction, so what do you believe are the basic and most necessary duties and responsibilities of the DA office, and if that expectation is the same across all other offices by different counties? So let's start with Tom.
Yeah, so, you know, I think the role of a DA, yes, it does go across all counties. It doesn't change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But the role of a DA, of course, is to prosecute crime. We have an adversarial system, the public defender or defense bar on one side, the prosecutor on another, and then the judge who calls balls and strikes, and, you know, ultimately the trier of fact makes a decision in the case. But what makes a district attorney unique, as far as from my perspective, and why I loved being a prosecutor so much, is that it was the one area of law that I practiced where I could always do the right thing. When I had clients, you know, you can't pick your clients all the time, especially when you work for a law center. I would have clients that were dishonest or had, you know, done things that weren't, you know, the most correct way of handling things. And as their attorney, I'd have to deal with it. But I was constantly put in positions of, you know, helping clients that I didn't really agree with, and, you know, achieving results that I didn't think were just. As a DA, you have discretion to dismiss cases you can't prove, and you actually have an obligation to do that. So when I say you can always do the right thing, you can, but it's sometimes the painful choice to do the right thing. You may not be able to charge a case that you believe the person's guilty, you think that they're going to pick up a new case in the future, but if you don't have the evidence, you can't charge it. So I think the role of a DA is to prosecute crime, but to do so with integrity, always doing the right thing. And when I first started at the San Francisco DA's office, I can't remember the name of the prosecutor, but he was from Santa Clara and he put on a training. And he said that he was coming to the end of his 30-year career. And he said that the one thing about being a DA was he could always look himself in the mirror and never had any questions about what he had done. And I think that's a very unique thing in practicing law.
Thanks so much, Tom. Butch, would you say that that's very much the sentiment?
Yeah, I expect you're going to see a theme between most of us haven't met each other, and I touched on it early on when I said a DA's job is to do what's right. And what that means in the context of the criminal justice system, which is an adversarial system, is our job is to enforce the law, right? And we have discretion to decide how to enforce the law in what most of us refer to as quality of life crimes, right? And more DAs are becoming more accepting of the fact that some people need to have a sort of different approach, right? Somebody needs mental health. Let's see what we can do to get them some mental health treatment. Some people have a drug problem. Let's see what we can do to get them help with the drug problem. And for years, at least in Alameda County and most of California, more and more drug crimes, nonviolent drug crimes, are not being prosecuted and being diverted. That's just the reality of the system we live in. And it also is a reflection of most of our communities. But on the other end of the spectrum, in an adversarial system, is our job is to hold people accountable, particularly for violent crimes. Any crime where somebody's assaulted, any crime where somebody is hurt, robbed, raped. Your job as a DA is to make sure you hold the other person accountable. Everybody needs to understand that the system is designed to protect one person's rights. It is designed to protect the defendant's rights. And it's a system that every DA signs up for. And we happily do so. But we also have to understand that as DAs, if we don't stand for the victims, then nobody will. So when I say our job is to do what's right, there are a lot of variables involved, including making sure we enforce the law, making sure we take into consideration the individual characteristics of somebody who has committed a crime, but also to ensure that the victim is not lost in the process, and that what they think is fair and what the law deems as appropriate, that we enforce that law. And the reason why I pointed out that it's an adversarial system is we know that on the other side of the bar are defense attorneys and public defenders. And if, as prosecutors, we don't stand up for the role that we are supposed to, suddenly the only people who are hurt are victims, because you have people who now, instead of being an adversarial system, we are holding hands with the defense bar saying, yeah, we understand that this person was stabbed or assaulted, but we're going to do what we can to help out the defendant. And I'll give you one example of a case that I handled. The last case I tried when I was on trial staff was the Nia Wilson case, which was highly publicized. It was a stabbing on BART, where a young African-American girl and her sister were stabbed in their neck, and Nia died as a result. And it's all caught on video. Her assailant had a long history of mental health. And I, as the DA, have to look at that and decide, based on the evidence, was this an assault that was the result of a mental health episode, or was it somebody who is just a terrible person who happens to have mental health history? And Tom touched on this, and I know that everybody else will. DAs have a lot of discretion, right? But when we have a case like that, we have to analyze, is it somebody who we think should go through the traditional criminal justice system? And in that case, I made the decision. My office trusted me to make the decision. On the other end of the spectrum, I just had a case where it's very clear that the person has a severe mental health history. And as the DA who now decides 95% of the cases in Alameda County and North County, I said, look, we're going to agree that this person is insane, and we're going to send them to Napa State Hospital to get treatment. When I know other DAs say our job is to do what's right, that's the simplest way to put it. But there are lots of variables that we have to take into consideration, including making sure we do our part to protect the community that we represent.
Well, Butch, thanks so much. Thanks so much for, especially for highlighting the severity and the seriousness of the responsibility of what it means to be a part of that office. And again, thanks so much to all of you for all the work that you've done. Dana, I'm curious as to, since you're the co-chair for the Human Trafficking Task Force, I'm interested as to the responsibilities you see the DA has to the victim themselves in that regards.
Thank you so much for that that lead in. I was going to kind of riff off of what Butch said and what Tom said, in that what victims have in California that we don't have other places is Marsy's Law. It's the Victims' Bill of Rights. And in California, we put that in the California Constitution. So that means that victim rights have supremacy over state law. And defendant rights are in the United States Constitution. So we're having to definitely be mindful of those, because if we violate a defendant's rights, then it impacts the rights of my victim, because the case will be reversed on appeal. So I need to be mindful of our defendants' rights. But at the same time, I see my job, and I teach our prosecutors that our job is to be the voice of those victims. And sometimes what it means is that my victim does not want the prosecution. She or he does not want to be there. When I supervise domestic violence, I'm prosecuting violence that occurs within intimate partner relationships. And I've had to talk to my victims about, look, my job here is to take violence out of the equation, not to tell you who you should or shouldn't love. That's on you. I prosecuted a really horrible rape case that was within a very extended family. The youngest daughter was the same age as the oldest granddaughter, and they went out to party one night. The girls got pulled over for a DUI. My victim went home, and her uncle, who was her same age, was on methamphetamine and raped her violently. It broke the entire family up. And grandma was a very important witness to me. Grandma was the matriarch of that family. I told her that my job was to make sure her voice was heard, even if it was something she didn't think I wanted to hear. But I needed her to do her obligation and tell the truth. But if she needed to stand up and speak on behalf of her son-in-law at the time he was held accountable for the crime, I would make sure the judge listened to her. And Clemente Mejia was convicted of violent rape. So my victim had her justice. And I stood with grandma when she spoke for leniency on behalf of the defendant, because that is our obligation under the California Constitution. Victims have a right to be heard, and they have a right to, if they're going to participate in our process and tell the truth, then it is my obligation to make sure that their voices are heard in terms of what they want to see done. Most recently, I got to speak for two little girls in a giant sex trafficking case where the defendant was prosecuted not just by my office, but also by the United States Attorney's Office that participates in our task force. And he was a very affluent white man who was investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to buy 10-year-old girls to keep at an Airbnb for whenever he wanted to keep them for his sexual pleasure and videotape it. When he was frustrated in those efforts, he tried to buy my victim's children from her. She's an immigrant woman who works a night job at a janitorial service, and she told the little girls that Santa's watching and they could earn extra Christmas presents by coming to work and help her. And waiting outside in the dark and the rain was this man who offered mom $40,000 for one night with her little girls. Our law enforcement partners couldn't figure out what crime it was. We had language barriers. And so they arrested him for battering mom because they grabbed mom's arm. And that night, my very rich defendant was on a plane to Cambodia, where he was frequenting child brothels there. My task force assembled. We have FBI, Homeland Security, the United States Attorney, so that we could deal with the entirety of his criminal conduct. It spanned, it was multi-jurisdictional, not just international, but also multiple counties. And so part of our job as prosecutors in representing the interests of our victims is making sure that they don't fall through cracks when we have sophisticated defendants that jump jurisdictional boundaries. And so we were waiting for him when he came back from Cambodia, and he was prosecuted not just by me, but also by the United States Attorney's Office. And one of the most amazing things I got to do was read the victim impact statements from my little girls, talking about what they were worried about, which was they needed their mom to feel safe. because mom didn't have status. And mom needed to feel safe coming to court to make sure that her children were safe and that this man didn't get out and try to take anybody else's little girls away. And so I'm super proud that the first disclosure in this case wasn't to law enforcement. She went to our Family Justice Center and she told an advocate in Spanish, I need help. And they're part of our task force. I'm also on their board. So I got a phone call at night on my cell phone while I was in another trial telling me, you have to do something. I was really excited to be able to mobilize our task force and stand up for these victims, to engage all of the other partners that I get to work with, because there's no one person in the criminal justice system that can do all the justice that sometimes these victims need. And we had this remarkable result. The first time I met Tom was trying to get justice for a woman who was being kidnapped or attempting to be kidnapped by a pimp. She was engaging in commercial sex work in Richmond, and he was trying to grab her and force her to work for him. This was a person who also was engaged in prostituting women in San Francisco. And the cases standing alone weren't strong enough to go through prosecution, but by collaborating with Tom and San Francisco DA investigators, we're able to combine our evidence. He was able to give me jurisdiction of the San Francisco conduct, and we held this man accountable, and he went to prison, and both of the girls who were victimized in this case received services and support from advocacy partners. So working for victims can mean a lot of different things, and it means, like Nicole said, we don't have boxes. We have to think outside of those boxes, and to me, collaboration with as many different partners as possible, and making sure that we know that we represent victims and we are the voices of those victims is how we get that work done.
Well, Dana, thank you so much. Just I guess I just want to say that you all see these cases on a daily basis, but just hearing about these things it's just so unfortunate. And again, I just have to be grateful for the work that all of you have done. Jessie, you've been there for you said 35 years or so? 34 years. Well, you're a veteran. Do you feel like the expectations of what it means to be a DA or within that office has changed over time? Or how has that looked like over the years?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've advanced so much over the course of time in our understanding of what it means to offer support to victims and to change how we prosecute. The advent of those systems that we talked about earlier, where you have the ability to offer a diversion to individuals, and not necessarily the first thing is, throw them in court for as long as, or in jail for as long as you can put them there. When I first started, I mean, that was a lot of what it was. It was just going after criminals and making sure you got as much time as you could. But over the last 30 years, I've seen tremendous change. And my former boss, Jackie Lacey, was really instrumental in trying to put things together for diversion, things for veterans, victim services, and we've advanced so far in those things over the last 30 years. But again, there's always going to be somebody who, really doesn't deserve services. I remember sitting in court the day Richard Ramirez was convicted, and having him turn before the jury was brought in. He decided he didn't want to sit there for the was it 45 minutes while they read all 38 verdicts on the case. But he always wore sunglasses, and he lifted his sunglasses up and turned around and looked at me, and not at me, more like through me. That man had absolutely no soul. He had no compassion for other individuals. There are people that don't need diversion. And so that's one of the things I think that prosecutors have developed over the years, is the ability to look at defendants on an individualized basis and make determinations on what is appropriate for them in their situation based on their background. Is there more that we can do? Probably. This is an evolving system, obviously. But first and foremost is you have to care about the victims. You have to care about those people who have been victimized by somebody who wants to take advantage of them. Now, I have done victims who are victims of violent crime, victims of rape, victims of robbery, but I've also done victims of automobile dealerships who rip off their consumers or their customers by not disclosing charges. So it's been, for me, a great career because that's what I've looked for. I've looked at how do I help victims, and being a prosecutor, that's what you get to do. You get to talk with people, you get to find out about them, you get to try to help them. And it's not always just, hey, this guy's going to jail. It's yes, this guy is going to jail, but this guy's also going to get hopefully some treatment. And that's one of the things that I struggle with, is that we want to do this, but yet we don't get the resources that is truly needed to be able to provide some of these services. We have people that need to get into programs, but yet there's no space because it's full. It's frustrating to want to be able to help the defendants, and yet also like you want to help victims, because we're not all cold-hearted individuals who only want retribution. We want to see society, the people in society, do better. And so it's frustrating when you want to do some of those things, but yet you don't have the resources available to do it. And it's never a thing that it should be an all or nothing. And we have to have discretion, and we have to have the ability to tailor individual results for individual cases based on individual factors. There is no one size fits all that you can place on cases that come before you. And so that's one of the things I think that a lot of people don't understand, is that, you know, you can't just automatically assign a punishment to somebody just because they committed a certain crime. You have to look at it based on all the factors.
Well, Jessie, thanks so much for sharing your experience about that, and also being on the forefront of being a part of that change of what it means to be a prosecutor. Nicole, you mentioned that sometimes it's about thinking outside of the box. How has that looked like? Because you've worked in San Francisco and in your current position, how does that look like in those two different areas? Does it differ in how you make that approach in regards to the responsibility of a DA?
I think yes. So there's a couple layers here. I think that San Francisco is uniquely situated, being a city and a county, so they can mobilize programs. They can mobilize initiatives, if everybody got along, much more swiftly, right? In other counties, you have people who, there are multiple cities, everybody's fighting, county wants to keep their dollars, but counties are the ones who are in charge of giving the behavioral health services to the city, and it makes things a little bit more complicated. So in the city of San Diego, like in the theme of prosecution and knowing that we need to be adaptable individuals, like we can't always wait for, the situation to come to us. If we know that people in the community, let's just think quality of life crimes, right? Things that we see every single day. You have shopkeepers, you have school children walking to school. They're being, terrorized, people who have mental health issues, substance use issues, homelessness. And how do you adapt and get to that before someone is cited? And then you wait months, and then they come to court, and then you go to diversion. For low-level crimes, I think it's very misunderstood that not that many people actually get referred and into meaningful services and treatment. So what you can do as a prosecutor is partner with your law enforcement, be more proactive at the front end so that the burden on them in dealing with lower level crimes is reduced and the focus on victims and the focus on the communities is higher. Cases can be investigated, and then the time and money is spent much more wisely. Why do we have to wait for people to continue to fail? And that is how our system has been built, because mental health and behavioral health services are not available. So when you have someone who's homeless, like, oh, well, instead of helping them, at the first blush when they have, alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder or mental health, just let them continue to fail until maybe time has gone by, and you may never be able to get that person in the same functional way that they had been a few years ago, because there are lots of people in the community like that. So you have to be able to adapt with the laws. Like, do we prosecute crack pipes? No, we don't prosecute crack pipes because that is not useful, right? So with time, there are standards and there's culture that, us as a community have evolved, right? So we look at substance use differently, but like Jessie said, we need to make sure that there are places for them. And in order to make sure there's places for them, that prosecutor may need to be the person to hold behavioral health services accountable, maybe be able to talk to Health and Human Services and say, hey, you owe us this. This is important to our community. It is not fair for people to use the jail as their holding ground because you have decided to underbet our community, right? And this is just the perennial conversation that has happened over time, and people need to accept and realize that, like we've all said, there are violent people in our community. There are people who do need to go to prison. They have done terrible things to people. And there are other individuals who need help. They need structure. They need a safe environment that is not being given to them, because whether we think that people have a choice, because people who live on the street don't necessarily have the same continuum of care, right? So as a prosecutor, you need to say, well, we can't do anything in court and we're not going to wait 7 months for this to happen. So how can we help our law enforcement and fire department do this sooner? And that is a really important, I think, underutilized tool in the community and understanding of what a DA can do, right? Because the DA is there to help make everybody feel better. And that comes in so many different ways, because there isn't a box. Like, we shouldn't have to wait till everybody comes to us in our courtroom and we know that there are crimes and there are harms that are being taken care of. So I think that focusing at the city attorney's office in San Diego, and then now being able to do accountable things like conservatorships and really diving deeply into what mental health and behavioral health we're getting is very enlightening, right? And I always look to San Francisco as like a good model. And I think that it's just getting everybody on the same page moving forward.
Nicole, thanks so much. And I really appreciated that highlight focus on the different ways in which a DA makes a safer place for the defendant and the victim, and how you adapt to the times in the different regions with different communities. Just a quick segue. I just want to highlight someone here, wonderful individual, Nancy Tung, who's with the participants right now. But I really like Nancy to say a few words just to quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited that SOAR is putting on this really informative panel with so many of my friends who are prosecutors. I wish I could be on the panel with you guys tonight, but unfortunately, I am in another meeting. The meeting is the local San Francisco Democratic Party, and tonight's meeting is really centered around the DA recall, which I think, you're getting a basis right now for what the DA should be doing. The meeting is going to go long. There are more than 90 people right now for public comment, but this is such an important issue with respect to San Francisco right now. We are at a crossroads, I think, and whether or not you support Chesa Boudin or not, there is a right way to be progressive and to do criminal justice reform that does not do harm to public safety. And so these are the issues that we're going to be talking about. I think that each of these prosecutors is very experienced, and you can get a rich understanding of what prosecutors do and how they can really balance those things between the interest of public safety and also making sure that our systems are fair. So I'm really excited that this program is happening. I wish I could be a fuller participant in it, but I will be sure to watch the recording. And I'll drop in the chat the link to the DCCC meeting in case anyone wants to take a look, because we're going to be going for a while. So thanks for having this, and thanks for having me on for just a second.
Nancy, thanks so much for everything. And God help you with the 90 people at public comment. Oh my
Thanks,
God.
Drew.
No, not at all. And
Wait, Drew, didn't you know we're going to do that here too tonight?
no, it's just beads of sweat that start.
Just kidding. Keep going.
I just want to say Nancy is an incredible community leader in the city, and has just been a wonderful a joy to work with at all times. Just wanted to point that out. But so we're gonna go into some questions that were submitted to us previously, and a lot of these questions revolve around different arguments that were being made during the course of the DA recall that's going on here in San Francisco. And we thought it'd be really good for people to know what the clarification actually is, what the boundaries are, what it actually looks like, what it should look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question. Any one of you can pop in and take it, but I'll probably call on one of you. And all I ask is that since we have a lot of meat to dive into, if you could keep the answers concise, but we'll go around as many of these questions as we can. So the first one that I think is really good to know is, what is the relationship between crime rates and the DA's office? Are crime rate statistics a good indication of the job the DA is doing? I feel like this is a good question for Tom.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. So I was in the crime strategies unit. Statistics are one of the things that I worked with. I was there when the DA dashboard, the one that's currently being used by the DA's office, was created. And no, statistics are not a good crime indicator. So I'll use the example of the organized retail crime task force that I was on. When I covered for Charlie Basesto, who is a former San Francisco DA, I was going to meet with retailers to the Union Square, now currently the Union Square Alliance. At that time, it was the Union Square Business Improvement District. And knowing that I was going to meet with retailers, I went and pulled statistics to see what cases were being reported and what the rates of shoplifting or thefts were. And it had gone down about 15–20%. So I got an email from the analyst saying, hey, congratulations, these numbers are great. And then I met with Neiman's, L Brands, which is Victoria's Secret, Randall Scott, who was the director of the bid, and they said, no, our thefts have gone up exponentially. They had just stopped reporting because nobody was doing anything. And so those numbers were completely skewed. And so one of the retailers actually provided me their actual data of their losses. And when our stats at the DA's office showed crime going down 20%, their thefts had gone up 475%. So it wasn't off by a little bit, it was off by orders of magnitude. And without that data, the state task force never would have been funded. And so you'll hear a lot, well, retail crime isn't that bad, it's not really happening. And then you see like Operation Proof of Purchase, where there was an $8 million recovery in stolen property. So how do you get an $8 million recovery for crime that's also not happening? So the statistics are not useful in that regard. The way to solve that problem is with retail, you can go to the shrinkage. What are the business's losses? If the business is losing money, then law enforcement is not working. If they're losing money to theft, whether it be for embezzlement or outside people coming in and stealing, then law enforcement's failing. And just because the people give up reporting doesn't mean that the crime isn't still occurring. The other, and I'll be really quick about this, but the other problem with statistics is when you have a statistic for, quote, prosecution. That doesn't mean anything. If you don't have a conviction, if that person who does get prosecuted winds up getting a dismissal and then commits the same crime again, it isn't useful. And what winds up happening is, let's say it's something like narcotics trafficking. If a DA's office says, well, we've increased our drug prosecutions by 75%, that may sound good, but then if you then find out that the 75% increase is all the same people being consistently released again, and then they're not actually getting convictions, they're being diverted and to programs they're ineligible for, and it's just a revolving door. They're racking up stats, but it's just a few people committing a lot of crime with no intervention. A good analogy would be if you're a basketball player and you say, hey, I'm the best player for the Warriors because I take the most shots. Well, the first question should be, did any of your shots go in? And it's like, well, no, none of my shots went in. And it's like, well, then how'd you take so many shots? It's like, well, I kept stealing the ball from my teammates and then bricking it. So, you want to know what actually is effective. So the stats to look at are there repeat offenders? If there are repeat offenders, then why isn't them going through the system working? And then looking at the conviction rate. Are you actually getting convictions, or are you just charging cases and then losing them or dumping them later?
I see. God, I just love the part of the analogy where they're not only stealing the ball but breaking their own teammate. Or,
well, the thing, you see that with like SFPD and the DA's office, when a DA's office is, publicly blaming their law enforcement partners for not getting results, it's not useful. So yeah, right. I think I think that analogy is pretty accurate.
Got it. Well, thanks so much. Following that, then are conviction rates then a good indication of the efficacy of the DA's office? And in regards to convictions, how much flexibility does the DA have in choosing to file, prosecute, plea, or determine outcomes? Butch, if you could cover that.
So I don't think conviction rates are a good indicator as well, because it's a results driven thing. If somebody is arrested for murder, but they are given a 3-year sentence and there's no real issue with the murder, is that justice to the victims? The answer is clear, it's not. So it's statistics, as Tom pointed out, can be used to demonstrate anything. To me, it's really you need to focus on repeat offenders and what is happening, right? I've seen cases where somebody is arrested for we call it 1085. It's a stolen car, and they're let out immediately. Then they steal another car and they're let out immediately. Then the next crime they commit is a carjacking with a gun. Now, if we had tried to stop their sort of role, if you will, maybe the victim who has a gun stuck in their face and their car violently taken, that doesn't happen, right? And yeah, if somebody's first theft crime for stealing a car, yeah, we give them the benefit of the doubt and we try to give them alternative services. But if they have a long history of stealing cars and other crimes, and then as a DA, I just ignore all that and I say, well, this is just a property crime, right? Or I say, okay, you're accused for a carjacking, but I'm going to let you plead guilty to just a stolen car, and I'm going to give you probation. How is that justice for the victim? But I get to say I got a conviction. I got a conviction. So I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to speak about San Francisco, but I can tell you that this happens in every DA's office in across the United States. I have a colleague who handled 13 homicide cases, and they handled them successfully. They could say, I got a conviction in every single one. But when you peel the layer of the onion, you realize that the vast majority of those cases resolved for 6 years because there was a quote unquote problem with the case. And DAs do have discretion. They do have discretion. And that DA decided there were problems with the case. The victims' families in most of those cases were very, very upset. They thought that there weren't any problems, right? But that DA could say, I successfully handled 13 homicide cases, versus another DA who says, yeah, I successfully handled 13 homicide cases and I got 10 convictions for murder because that was what was justified. So I think most of us are going to agree that statistics really don't mean a lot. The results are what really mean something, and whether the victims were given the justice they deserve, whether the defendant were given the justice they deserved. And a lot of people, because I handled a lot of the most serious cases in Alameda County, I just have been that person. And when I talk to a lot of students, they'll ask me what my favorite case is. And I'll tell them my favorite case is actually a case that didn't go to trial. It's a case that pled. 19-year-old young man was involved in a robbery with a gun where the victim was pistol whipped. The DA who had the case before me offered the young man 12 years because he had the gun. I got the case, I looked at it, and his co-defendant, if you will, was his uncle who had a long criminal history. And I knew what happened. The uncle says to the 19-year-old, you hold the gun, we're gonna go do this robbery. And the uncle knows it makes it worse for him. I look at the case and I'm like, he did do a robbery with a gun. There was a pistol whipping, but the victim was not permanently injured. And the victim said, look, I've forgiven him. I want him to get help. And I said, look, I can't give him a program because he doesn't fit a program. But instead of 12 years, I gave him a 3-year sentence and let him stay local, meaning he never went to prison. I see that young man 5 years later in the courthouse. He runs up to me and he says, hey, Mr. Ford, do you remember me? And I go, yes, I remember you. What are you doing here? Because he's in the courthouse. And he put his hands up and he said, no. I'm here because I got a ticket. I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance. I'm married now, I have a kid, and I have a 9-to-5 job. That's my favorite case. And as DAs, we get to do those things. But statistics on convictions they barely scratch the surface, because you can do whatever you want with a case. But the question is it the right thing to do? Which you will see. Most of us, I think, are going to agree our job is to do what's right.
I really appreciate that answer. It seems like from both Butch and Tom, just the numbers never tell the full story. There is so much depth to it. There's so much of a gray area, but also, Butch, you highlight the responsibility to do what's right, and to do what's right is also what you owe to the victim and the defendant as well. And I really appreciated that answer. Thank you. I wanted to, in regards to what the DA does for the victim as well, Dana, I wanted to ask, because this was brought up in the course of the campaign, and because some of the complaints was that certain victims were saying that they weren't getting connected to the resources that they needed to. They weren't being made aware of updates in court casings or when the next hearing was going to be. I wanted to ask real quick, what kind of resources should be available through the DA's office for victims to help navigate through the judicial process, and just in general, like language support, mental health?
Every DA's office, the state of California has a state program that allows us to bring victim advocates into DA's offices. And we started working with victim advocates, probably more than 15 years ago. When I started with the DA's office, when I was starting our first elder abuse unit, we didn't have any advocates. And so it was me and one investigator trying to work with a population that really needed a lot of services and support. And there was nothing for that. We worked with our probation department to try to work with victims, which really was very poorly suited. And so now we have the Victims of Crime program through the state of California, and the DA's office, our office, has applied for and received multiple grants to add advocates. So I have 2 advocates that work with me in my office to do human trafficking cases. And they will go to court with our victims, and they are notorious about advocating for victims. I've had an advocate wait for me in the parking lot by my car, hand me the phone, say, you need to call the victim, she wants to talk to you right now, wait for me outside the bathroom stall. So they're really serious when they take the victim rights very seriously. And under state law, a victim of interpersonal violence has the right to have two persons of their own choice come to court with them. If you've ever been to a wedding, right? When the bride walks in, everyone turns because she's the person everybody wants to see. We all want to see her dress. We all want to see the look on her face. And we all look at the groom because we want to see the look on that person's face. And oh, look at this. Imagine that at a criminal trial. The person everybody wants to see is the victim. And you are the person surviving this amazing trauma. And you walk to a door and you have to open it. You have no idea what's on the other side. And you have to talk about the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life in public. And people are going to ask you questions. The first person only gets to ask these, then what happened? What happened next? Can you explain that to me? That's me. Those are direct examination questions. And then the attorney on the other side, their job is to make you look like a liar. Isn't it true that? Well, you said this, and now what about that? I'm in the middle of a sex trafficking case, so I'm thinking about my victim right now. And the person who harmed you is watching you because they have the constitutional right to confront and cross-examine. It is the most horrifically traumatic, re-traumatizing experience for a victim. And I look at this person and say, hey, come to court and let's go do this together. I can't do anything to support my victim other than be their voice in court and fight for their rights and argue with the judge and make sure they're taken care of. But state law says the two people that you choose to come to court with you, one of them can come to the stand with you. Imagine that walk. You open the door and you have to walk to the stand, but someone is walking there with you. Literally that phrase, I've got your back. They can't touch or talk. And these are specially trained advocates that every DA's office can work with. And they will be able to sit behind our victim and support them that way. And I've talked to countless victims who have told me, I was able to do it. I was able to make we talk about the walk. I could do the walk because my advocate was with me. And just knowing that. And then we position, when I have to do this with little kids, right? We do a court visit in advance and we say, wow, we're going to go practice going to court. And it starts with, come visit me at my office. And then we talk about who gets to push all the elevator buttons. If you're a mom, you know how much kids fight about pushing those elevator buttons. And you're the one who gets to push all the elevator buttons. And then we're going to go in and we're going to meet the judge and we're going to look at the courtroom. And California state law lets kids rearrange the courtrooms and make the judge take off his or her robe if it's going to make them feel safe enough to tell the truth, because that's what we want. A trial is a search for truth. And no one can tell the truth and feel safe if they're going through traumatic, horrible traumas. And so I fought for child victims' rights when the person they want is their parent, but the parent's also a witness. The rules are witnesses only can be in the courtroom one at a time. Nope, we can bend that rule if it's the right thing to do, and we'll fight for that. If the advocate that the child trusts, they're going to walk up and sit behind them when they testify at the witness stand, then who do you want to look at in court? Because you don't have to look at the bad person. You only have to look at that bad person one time when we're going to say, is this the person? You see this person in court. We're going to move the person that you want to see that's going to make you feel safe. Mom, cousin, another advocate. Where in the courtroom do you want that person to be? And your job is to look just at that person or look at me so that you don't have to be scared of the person that hurt you. I had a 6-year-old who told me that he wanted to testify in the middle of the courtroom. We feel so exposed. We call it the well of the court because his legs were too short. He couldn't reach the floor and he couldn't lean forward to speak into the microphone. And what I promised him was that he was going to get to hear what his voice sounded like on a microphone. And so he testified about seeing his mother beaten and raped by her boyfriend on Christmas Day, holding the microphone because that's what he wanted to do. And he wanted to get to tell his truth. And when the case pled right before we swore the jury at sentencing, he told me, you promised me I could tell my truth. And this 6-year-old sat in that chair and held the microphone and looked at the man and heard his mom and said, you can't hurt us anymore. That's one of my favorite stories, is giving courage to a victim and using our advocacy resources to make sure that they know when they go to court, they are not alone. They are never alone. We will always have a team there to support them, not with just DA advocates, but we work with community advocacy groups as well through our Family Justice Center and through other community organizations to make sure that whatever the victim needs before, during, and after a prosecution, those needs can be met so that they don't just survive this horrible experience, but they overcome and move forward with their lives.
Dana, thank you so much for that. That was so heartwarming. And you know, I was only aware of Marcy's law in regards to rights for the victim. And just I did not know that there was so much of this that was offered and guaranteed for a victim through that harsh reality, through that situation. So just again, thank you so much. Jessie, I something that was brought up to me was a critique that that unlike judges where California has its commission on judicial performance, there doesn't seem to be oversight, or at least visible oversight over DAs. So in the case, like in the arguments that are happening in the city in San Francisco, where some people are saying, oh, certain victim rights were not guaranteed, or some parts of Marcy's law was violated in not being able to provide such services, or not having the victim feel comfortable, like what Dana was talking about, for letting them to speak their truth. What in your experience, what does that oversight look like to ensure that that happens? And is there oversight?
Well, there is oversight. I mean, we are covered by the state bar. So if we do something, and it does happen, occasionally there are DAs who get overzealous, who want only to win and not ensure justice. And so they will do something that is unethical. They will withhold evidence. They will have somebody testify knowing that they're committing perjury. They will cover up some wrongdoing, and the state bar has investigators, and if they get a referral, the state bar will conduct an investigation, and they will disbar a prosecutor who is doing something that is unethical or illegal. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be work related. You can, pick up some type of a crime or do some other thing that is with a moral turpitude violation, and you can lose your ticket to be able to practice law. And the state bar has actually, in the last, I want to say 10 years or so, has taken a lot closer look at prosecutors, and have vigorously gone after prosecutors for doing any number of things, including, systematically excluding people from juries based on race or ethnicity or other things. So there really is some control of that, but ultimately, with a district attorney, the ultimate authority on that is the electorate. They are the ones who ultimately get to make the decision on, do they like what is going on, or do they want to see some form of change? Ultimately, it's the job of a district attorney is, to do justice, but we do it for the people of our counties or cities, if we're doing a city attorney work. And ultimately, it is, up to the voters to make that decision on, are you happy with the way things are going? Do you want to see changes? What changes do you want to see? And it ends up being a public debate. Now, I'm in an office that is currently undergoing a lot of the same things that are going up in San Francisco. My current boss used to be the district attorney of San Francisco, and was the district attorney when I was doing my case involving Uber. So I've been dealing with my boss for, gosh, that was 8-9 years ago now that we started the Uber case. And there is also going on down here a recall, because there is some backlash over some of the policies and other things that have been initiated down here. And so ultimately, it's up to the voters to, take a look at those issues, hear from, both sides. Why are we doing certain things a certain way? And as you know, in LA County, when my boss took over, he issued a whole series of directives saying what we can and cannot do in relationship to cases. And some of those, the union that represents the rank and file prosecutors down here said, you can't do that. And so the Association of Deputy District Attorneys filed a suit against our prosecutor to overturn those edicts that he had done. And some of those have been stayed. Now, I mean, some of those things included things like not charging 3 strikes when the state statute says a prosecutor shall plead every prior conviction of violent or serious felony under the 3 strikes law that they're aware of. We were told that we were not to do that. So it's a bit frustrating when you're a prosecutor and yet you have your boss telling you not to follow the law as you're directed to do. So that's why people in our office and our union went after that. But ultimately, you know, it's going to come down to are there going to be signatures enough to have the same type of recall here? And is that debate then going to be put to the voters? In San Francisco, they've already made that determination that they do want to have the recall. They do want to have this public debate. And so it's ultimately, it's the voters who have the say, and potentially, you know, the state bar could get involved in some of these things, although I don't think that the state bar is going to come in and disbar my boss because he told us we can't file 3 strikes.
Well, thank you so much. Just that's really good to know that there are different groups and other ways as to watch and try to reverse different changes that might be made to what shouldn't be. And good to know that again, good clarification that it is up to the electorate. The electorate votes the DA in, and it's up to the electorate to vote them out if need be. Nicole, I wanted to ask you, you know, so we were getting a lot of questions in the comments, and I've been reading through these. One theme that's been going around is people are asking about that gray line between how having to uphold concepts and trying to change what it means to be a prosecutor by trying to make it safe, but doing it in a progressive means, and also upholding the incarceration in regards to the consequences and the deterrence. And so some people are asking, like, how does that fit now? How do you make that balance, and what should that look like? And how do you define that clear distinction?
Yeah, excellent question. And it is very multi-layered, and it actually goes into a little bit of another question, right? Poor relationship between district attorneys' offices and their law enforcement, whichever agency it may be, whether it's CHP, San Francisco Police Department, BART, whoever it is, it's going to erode the possibility of the low-level progressive type of positive enforcement in making a change there, as opposed to, you know, really protecting victims and protecting communities from violent crimes, because more people are impacted by the quality of life crimes that can be, you know, prevented and supported, and people can be held accountable if there are good, positive working ways. And it doesn't have to be, you know, obviously getting sent to jail, but there has to be some sort of act, like alliance, right? There people need to be together. And this also goes to another thing that Jessie was talking about, because unlike LA, unlike San Diego, unlike I think every other county in the state, the DAs in San Francisco, they're at will. They will all get fired immediately. And that means that the electorate is that much more important, because even though you're a prosecutor and even though you know what justice is and you know what the right thing is going to be, you either do it and get fired, or do what you can to keep the train together, right? Like you think about people trying to protect the institution and help the people who are there without everything coming crumbling down, because these are public servants who have tried really hard. So that gray area is about being proactive and about really looking to the systematic causes of what's in the front. Like San Francisco is expensive. I mean, yes, it's not the model for everything perfect, but there are so many good ideas that if they are executed well without thinking about this enabling, hindrance, then, positive good could come to people who need it. And people need to be held accountable, because otherwise you go to the area in which you can commit the crime because you're not going to get in trouble. And what is good for, the LA district attorney when he was in San Francisco, and what's good for the current district attorney in San Francisco, is they can do what they want because they can keep people quiet. But then can they? Because people can only take it for so long. And that is why it's really important, right? We need to think about our culture, think about our community, and then make sure that we have standards. Those standards are described very specifically to our electeds. And then we receive the services that we deserve. And that's protection for us, for our children, for our old people, our fuzzy people, whoever it is. Like, we all deserve to be in a safe, civilized society. So I think that's how you blend it. And it really talks about communication and getting along.
Well, thanks so much, Nicole. Also, thank you for tying in the question about the relationship between departments. That was very smooth.
But I do.
Tom, I noticed you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on it. I see in the chat, Mr. Linden was asking about the relationship with SFPD and the DA's office, if that was fixable, and that there appears to be a work stoppage or something like that with SFPD. And I did want to address that because, when I was in law school, I started a student group called Community Advocates for Police Review, where we represented citizens in Berkeley and Oakland who filed complaints against Berkeley and Oakland police officers. And I did that from the late 90s, supervising law students, advocating for citizens against the police, all the way up into the early 2000s. When I was working as a DA and working with law enforcement, they knew that. Before I was at the DA's office, DC Redmond, now he's a Deputy Chief Redmond, he was the captain of the police academy. He actually hired me to teach at the academy, knowing that I used to file complaints against police officers. The time that I worked at Southern Station and Tenderloin Station, with every police officer I've ever worked, never had one give me any grief for the fact that I had filed complaints and actually held bad cops accountable. So I never had those issues. The other thing that I never had happen was any case that I worked on fall apart because SFPD didn't do their job correctly. Never once did I have that be an issue. So I know that recently there was an interview that was done where SFPD was being blamed for all the city's problems. And I never saw anything like that the 7 years I was at the DA's office. Particularly at Tenderloin, I just saw someone just posted about Tenderloin Station. The officers are making arrests. They're arresting the same people over and over again. They're being released. There's frustration. There's also, I know, a concern about being proactive about any policing because they're worried about being charged with a crime if something goes sideways. If you don't support the officers, if they don't feel like they're going to be treated fairly if something goes wrong, then yeah, you can expect them to be more concerned about protecting themselves than doing the job. It's no different for prosecutors. When I was at the office, I had no problem taking cases to trial. I was never worried about outcomes because I had, Linda Allen, Frank Karuba as supervisors. And I knew that I wouldn't have to worry about them coming after me for making some mistake. Even Gascon would say, if your heart's in the right place, they'll have your back. And I think that that's missing now. But I can say that all of these problems with SFPD and the DA's office, I think, are completely fixable. If cases start getting charged, the cops that want to work will start working. I know they're eager to do it. And, like I said, I have no tolerance for bad policing. And some of the officers I worked with at Tenderloin and Southern Station are some of the best cops I'd seen in 20 years. So I think the city's very lucky to have some of them that are still sticking around. And if things start to loosen up and go better, where cases start getting prosecuted, you'll see all those people step up and start working.
Tom, thanks so much for that. Yeah, I really appreciate how you've highlighted what that relationship needs to look like and how it can be amended. And at the same time, I've worked with Michael Redmond in the past. He's a great guy. He
Yes,
really
yes.
is solid man. We are coming to the end of the program. I just want to again thank all of you for spending your evening to come on over here despite your busy schedules and the crazy court cases that I'm sure you guys are handling. This is at least this has been very insightful for me as a lay person who doesn't know much about the specifics of the legal system, and to know what to expect, and to know what is being done in other places really puts into perspective of what we should expect here in San Francisco. I just wanted to go quickly around to everyone. If you all could give some last remarks, maybe for like a minute or so. Let's see. Nicole, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, my last remarks are, it is about justice, but it's also about the community, and it's about accountability. It's accountability of police officers, accountability of the prosecutors, accountability of our electeds, and, accountability of people who are providing the government services to us, right? Like, we all have a job and we all need to do it. And I think a lot of us really think that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And I have learned that that is not the case. There needs to be a lot more communication and a lot more accountability for people who think that they know better, but then when everything is falling apart, not there to back up what everybody in the community needs. And, it takes a lot of bravery for victims to go to court. It is very inconvenient. It is very awful. And I have worked with a lot of victims, and at the end of the day, they say, win or lose, like, I'm glad that I did that. And that's an awful thing to have to say. Like, I'm glad that I sat in that witness chair and I got to say my piece. Like, I'm glad that I've talked to police officers who needed to do better, right? And be able to say that and have them look at me and still be able to have a good conversation, because we all need to be honest with each other, and we all need to get each other's backs. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Jessie?
Need to find my unmute button. It's definitely not an easy thing. The criminal justice system is difficult, and making these decisions is difficult. Making policies and dealing with victims, dealing with the criminals, dealing with the families of the criminals, dealing with the families of the victims. It's at times incredibly gut-wrenching, and it is extremely, extremely difficult. And there is no one size fits all for the criminal justice system. It is definitely something that you have to have people who have experience, who understand what is involved for all the parties. And hopefully, this is something that we're going to be able to continue to expand and grow upon, and be able to come to these decisions. I don't envy all of you in San Francisco with the decisions that you're going to have to make. I'm in LA and they're doing that, but I don't live in LA, so I don't even get a say in who my boss is going to be. So I'm just kind of a bystander in all of this. But it's definitely something that everybody needs to take a hard look at and decide what it is that they value the most. Is it the ability to feel safe? Is it the ability to understand that your needs are being met? And if not, how do you change, and what do you have to change that with?
Jessie, thank you so much. Truly, thank you so much for all of that. Dana, would you like to impart some words?
I haven't been here quite as long as Jessie, but I've been in my DA's office for 25 years in a county that I grew up in, and I'm raising my kids here. And so I've seen pendulums swing far, and it's been really hard to feel like an old school prosecutor. And all of a sudden I'm having to learn everything all over again, because we work for a system that is intended to change. we work for an official that's elected on purpose. Our jobs are to be public prosecutors, which means that my job, my client is the people, all of them. And I need to represent all of them, which means I need to listen and I need to learn and I need to adapt when the system is changing. But I can't do it by myself. And so one of the things that I've been really a strong believer in is that we need to be the change that we want to see. We need to model that change. And so if the law is changing and I need to make sure that my law enforcement partners are bringing me cases that meet my new standards for prosecution, then it's on me to turn around and teach them what those are. So we do a tremendous amount of outreach and teaching. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so crazy time for us because we could go places in person for the first time in a while. This year, I was invited to several different churches to talk about what human trafficking is and what the task force does. And those were all things I did on the weekend and that I did at night, but because that's where the people are when I need to go talk to the people about what's a human trafficking task force and does it really happen in Contra, Costa County? What do you mean there's human trafficking in Danville? Yes, there is. And answer questions and be available and have that transparency that starts to build the trust we need, not just between the DA's office and our law enforcement partners and the DA's office and our community advocacy partners, but the DA's office and the public that we serve, because we are all, in fact, public servants, and we can only do it when we're working together and we're making sure somebody talked about being on the same page. So there's that importance of understanding and learning when the law changes and then turning around and making sure that we're bringing everybody up to that same level of getting us to what justice means for our community today.
Thank you so much, Dana. Butch.
I'll try to be brief. The bottom line is the district attorney's office and the deputy district attorneys or assistant DAs should reflect the community values and enforce those community values. That's not that hard to do. I've been around this system long enough to know that there's been a change, there's been a shift, and most DA's offices have shifted. I'm all for having a progressive prosecutor, but a progressive prosecutor means lower level crimes, we figure out a way to give the help we can. But assaultive crimes, serious crimes, the things I see coming out of San Francisco where the Asian American community is being attacked nonstop, those crimes need to be handled in a more traditional way, which means you go to jail. It is the only deterrent the system really has for violent crimes. And I'll share a personal story real quickly. My daughter is a second year at Hastings. She catches BART every day. A couple Thursday nights ago, her last class Thursday night is 8:30, and she catches BART home. Well, on that night, a friend of mine happened to be teaching at the class and decided he would give her a ride home. That same night at the Civic Center BART station, right before 9 o'clock, there was a murder. Somebody shot somebody else. My daughter would have been on the platform. So now, every Thursday night, I've told her, I'm going to come pick you up. I'm going to give you a ride home. We all, as DAs and as citizens, we know crime happens everywhere. But the reality is the job of the DA is to do its part to decrease crime, to protect the community from violent offenders. And I have been in San Francisco since I was an undergrad. I've gone there. I've hung out there. My daughter goes to school there, and I'm proud she goes to school there. But I'm afraid. I'm afraid for my daughter. I'm afraid for the citizens of San Francisco. And again, I'm all for progressive prosecution. I think most of us here have seen that is where the community values have gone. But if you're not going to protect the community, then you're not doing your job. And that's my fear. That's my concern. And I will continue to love the Bay Area. I will continue to do the job on this side of the Bay that I'm supposed to do. And all I can hope for is that on that side of the Bay, somebody, even if it's Chesa, somebody decides to do the job that the community needs. And that's my hope.
Butch, thank you so much. Truly, thank you so much. Tom.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to everybody on the panel. Butch, I never met you before, but I did know of you just by reading the news and followed some of your verdicts. It's an honor to meet you and hear you today. Jessie, it's also a pleasure to meet you. And then Nicole and Dana, it was good to see you again. And it made me kind of nostalgic from when we worked together before. But I think my final thought would be, the role of a DA, the actual job that a DA can do for the community is make it so that people can walk down the street and feel safe. You should be able to know if you park your car outside, you're not going to have your window smashed. If you're going to the grocery store, you're not going to be mugged. It isn't that difficult to do, to address those issues. You can do it with compassion, you can have accountability, but at the same time, look towards real solutions to problems that are going to be lasting and actually stop that cycle of violence. And I want to acknowledge one of the people who's in the chat, which is Jenny Burton, who is an amazing person. She put some links. Anyone who's not familiar with her, please Google Jenny Burton. She's in a couple of documentaries, she's in multiple news articles, but she is a great example of the system working, of someone taking their life and raising themselves up and turning everything around. And then now she's helping other people follow the same path that she did. And that's something that a DA can do with alternative sentencing. And so I think all of these problems that we're facing now are fixable. There just needs to be competence, and there needs to be a focus on doing the hard work. When you try and find solutions, there is no one size fits all. You need to have competent professionals to find out why the defendant's committing crime and then figure out a program that's going to work with them. Traditional prosecution's a lot easier. Just, hey, either you lock them up or you don't. But to find things that are going to work, it's a lot more effort. It takes a lot more skill, and you need trained people to do it. But if you look at Jenny Burton, she's the absolute reason why that's so important and why it pays off. And I can tell you in my caseload, I had multiple Jenny Burtons. And so that's what we want to focus on. And so I wouldn't call it a progressive or moderate or conservative argument. I think everyone can come together on agreeing that that's how prosecution should happen. That's the end result that we should be obtaining.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo that statement. Tom told me about Jenny, and I read the story, and I encourage all of you to read it. It is so inspiring. And I just want to say thank you, Jenny, for the work that you've done. But we're coming to the end of the program. I just want to say a couple things. One is that I want to give an incredible shout out and so much thanks to Jenny Lyons for being the mover and the shaker for all the logistics behind this meeting. As always, you're always so great to work with, always so great to converse with too. The other thing was I wanted to give an opportunity for the co-sponsors for this, the co-hosts for this event, to introduce themselves. I'd like to invite first Advocates 11 to just give a quick remark.
Evening, everyone. Thank you to my sister organizations. Thank you to SOAR and everyone for hosting this. This has been very inspiring. I think that's the word I can take from this. You've all shown a great wealth of knowledge of the subject, and it's a little bit reaffirming because there's things that you know, but you don't know that you know, but deep down you do. And so I just want to say thanks again. I think, things are looking up. The more we learn, the more we can share, is a good opportunity to get a dialogue going. And like I say, for everyone on the call who's from Advocates 11, whether you're for the recall, against it, or unsure, at least you have a little bit more of a clear picture of how things should work and what we should expect from our electeds and from our DA. So guys, thank you so much, and Godspeed.
Simon, we'll grab dinner at some point pretty soon. I'll finally respond to that text. Next is Brion's Society. If you guys are still around.
Yep, I'm right here. First off, I just want to say thanks to Drew and Marie. You guys did an incredible job putting this really impressive group of professional prosecutors together. It was an incredibly edifying hour and a half. So I'll be really brief. My name is Jay Dondi. I'm one of the co-founders of the Briona Society. We're a club for centrist conservatives, independents, and moderates, and we just connect and mobilize for common sense solutions in San Francisco. Primarily, we're motivated by the idea that with all of the talent and energy and resources here, there's no reason that this shouldn't be the greatest city in the world. But we have to be focused on the issues that matter to everyday citizens. And those are good schools, safe streets, plentiful housing, and a government that actually works. So if you're interested in helping us do some of these things, I encourage you to get in touch with us. We're at brionasociety.org, all one word. It's BRIONES society.org. And thanks again.
Thanks so much, Jay. I really appreciate all the work. Just to wrap it up, I hope this conversation has been insightful for everyone. It certainly has been for me. Nancy is putting in the chat there, but their DCCC meeting is still on the go. So if you guys want to hop on over there, be a part of those 90 people doing public comment, then I encourage you to do so. Marie, is there any other co-host for the event that I'm missing?
I'm not sure if there are any other co-hosts that are still here with us. You can scream out right now.
I'll do a plug for D2 Unite. We are the local group in District 2. If you're not familiar with what exactly that parameter includes, I'm happy to share a map, or you can check out d2unite.com. But we're essentially a group of concerned neighbors who want a better San Francisco all across the city. So I'm just so appreciative of all of our speakers this evening, dedicating their very precious time and energy and providing a really rational and engaging conversation for us to absorb and really understand what the real role of the DA is and what we as citizens should be expecting from our public leaders.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. Anyone else?
And with that, I think we just owe these speakers a round of applause. You have been so incredible. It is so great to learn from you. I feel like we all have a much better understanding now of what the role actually is, what it encompasses. I mean, I think we probably could have listened to you all night long because you have so much to impart, and so interesting, so fascinating, and just so intelligent. So I'm incredibly grateful for you being willing to share your not only your perspective, but your personal stories and the experiences you've had, and sort of where you've evolved and grown in your roles as prosecutors. Thank you so much. I hope you all will allow us to keep your information for maybe future events, because you're all really fantastic. And the 80 or so people who came through the event tonight were very lucky to get to hear from you, and I would love to share you with so many more people. So thank you, and have a great night. And
Everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so
everybody. Have a
Just-
great night. Stay
just-
safe.
Just to let
Keep
everyone
fighting
know,
the fight.
this video will be recorded, so if anyone missed anything, it'll be put up.
it'll be put up on the SOAR website.
Yep. Thanks so much, everyone. It truly was an
Bye.
honor.
Good night.
Good night.
Everyone. Bye.